everybody. Welcome to this talk, another talk from the Transformative Play Initiative series. We're very excited to present Dr. Theresa Jean Tanenbaum, or Tess. I won't introduce the talk because I'll let her do that, but I will introduce her a little. We kind of know each other through only this medium, through Zoom. And so I'm very grateful for this ability to speak across continents, literally, because we met when I was first starting my design project and was feeling completely at a loss of how to start working with role-playing games and being trans, because I am, and I know how powerful they can be. And I was utterly inspired by you then and in your recent work. So I'm so thrilled and very, very honored to introduce you. For those of you who don't know, Tess is a songwriter, a performer, a game designer, an artist, activist, and associate professor in the Department of Informatics at UC Irvine, where she is a founding member of the Transformative Play Lab. Her work is playful, provocative, and interdisciplinary, frequently straddling the line between art, design, and research. She seeks to create possibilities for social and individual change using participatory narrative to highlight how the identities that we inhabit in the world are contingent and negotiated. These experiences of transformative theatrical play create new models of being that are emancipatory, allowing oppressed and marginalized people to inhabit evocative new identities that reclaim the power and agency denied to them. And I am very, very thrilled to see you speak. Tess.
I'm excited to share this with y'all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just spend a moment making certain everything's set up, and then we'll get going. Optimize for video, share. And where did everyone go? Show video panel. There. Cool. Great. Can everybody see and hear me? We're all good to go?
All good to go.
All right. So yeah, good morning. I'm Theresa Jean Tanenbaum. You can call me Tess. I know a few of you, and I think some of you may know a version of me, but I don't think any of us have met in real life. And so I'm really sad I can't be there in person. I hope to be at some point. I'm really grateful to Sarah and Josephine for inviting me to join you today. Yeah, this is a newish talk. I've only given a version of this one other time, but these are ideas that have been taking shape over the last 3 years or so. I'm really excited to talk about restoring and memory and fiction and magic with you. And we are kind of at the tail end of the spooky season, but I'd like to begin today's talk with some magic. So when I was a child, I wrote out a ritual intended to restore my stolen female self to me. I set down detailed specifications for the girl I knew I was supposed to be, including my physical appearance, my socioeconomic situation, my personality, and my family situation. Nobody taught me how to do this. I just did it. I illustrated a magic circle with sigils I'd crafted and imbued with personal meaning. I mixed potions out of shampoos and lotions and other things I found in the cabinet under my mother's bathroom sink and made myself gag when I attempted to drink them, a memory that my inner mama now finds very troubling to think about. I keep the dregs of the potions in a doom box. I kept them in a doom box into adulthood when I rediscovered them as a tacky mess that should have been thrown away decades previously. I still remember how that potion smelled. This morning, or evening, wherever time it is, I'd like to invite you to consider games and play as sites for radical emancipatory identity work. This evening, I'd like to invite you to believe in magic. And given the nature of the subject and the nature of who and what I am, I will be taking an explicitly autobiographical approach to these ideas as a transgender woman, game designer, and practicing witch. In this talk, I argue that game design, like magic and activism, is a framework for invoking and materializing seemingly impossible desires for ourselves and our world. Within the magic circles of both play and witchcraft, we assert truths about the world that are decoupled from the often arbitrary rules and power structures that govern daily life. I reflect on this interplay of memory, history, fiction, and role-playing as sites for identity work and healing from trauma. I view this kind of play as a natural locus for what trans game studies might become in my own life, a chance to combine designed enactments with my own evolving journey of transformation. And while the practices I'll be considering here are largely focused on my own experiences, I believe that the nascent research space of trans game studies might draw upon them for inspiration. I'm going to be drawing together a large collection of ideas and theories this morning, and it may not immediately be clear to you why I'm talking about some of them. I promise that they do all fit together, and I ask that you keep an open mind while I slowly arrange all of the pieces of this puzzle on the table before assembling them into their final form. In the fall of 2019, I got to experience Twain, a single-player pervasive game created by Jay Lee. Twain challenges its player to inhabit a present world where they once had a twin who has since gone away. To play the game, you must briefly revise your understanding of your own personal history. You begin by journaling about your fictional childhood with this twin, following the writing prompts in the provided book. Oh, I should say there are spoilers for Twain in this talk, so if you are playing it, I apologize. There are some things I'm going to talk about that may spoil it. Um, the game invites you to imagine the magical experiences you and your lost twin shared. How did your magic work? What were your adventures like? But then your twin vanishes, and with them, so does the magic that you two worked together. The world that you now inhabit, mundane, ordinary, and quotidian, suddenly feels empty of something you hadn't known you were missing until reminded of its absence. A longing for a childhood that never was. Twain's central mechanic is to enlist you into believing, for just a moment, in a past that is impossible. It invites you to briefly rewrite your own memory to include a fiction that can't possibly be real, but which feels immediate and viscerally true within the experience of the game. Twain demands that you carry this new reality out into the world around you. Its final moments are meant to be played in a well-trafficked public place with an audience of strangers who don't know about the game or your secret magical history. Prior to the final act, you prepare by creating an alarm on your phone set to go off at a moment when you will be out in the world. The game instructs you to name the alarm after your twin and to assign it to your normal ringtone sound. The result is that your phone rings almost unexpectedly during your final moments of play. Your lost twin reaching out to you across the barriers of time and fiction to offer a chance at closure. Although not expressly designed to be a trans story, there are many elements of Twain that spoke directly to my experience of transition as a disabled, neurodivergent transgender woman. I cite it as an example of how gameplay and memory can interweave to produce a kind of healing fiction that is truer in some ways than the actual events that a player may have lived through. In 1995, White Wolf Games released Mage the Ascension, 2nd edition, a game that I know far too well because I was a young wannabe goth kid in the late 90s and the World of Darkness was my jam. A more flippant version of this talk might be titled, Mage taught me everything I needed to know about real magic 25 years ago, but I didn't understand it until I was in my 40s. This is because the central premise of this game's magic system was that the rules of reality as we experience them are the result of a shared social consensus among the sleepers, normal people who have not yet been awakened to the reality that everything is malleable and fluid. Mages, or will workers, know deeply and viscerally that reality doesn't work the way that everyone thinks it does, and it is the strength of their certainty that allows them to reshape reality according to their own will. However, if a mage does something that is too far outside the realm of what the consensus believes is possible, if they change something that is too overt or vulgar, then the consensus slaps back and the mage suffers consequences in the form of paradox. In this way, the consensual hallucination that the sleepers are trapped within polices itself, resisting any attempts to awaken them. And for every awakened mage who strives to spread enlightenment, there are others who benefit from the status quo and use it to oppress and control mages and sleepers alike. In the same year that I discovered and started playing Mage, 1999, two transgender women made a movie about being trans that was itself such an audacious act of magic that it reshaped the cinematic and cultural language of all action movies that followed it. Because these trans women were closeted and still passing as cis men, this movie became a mega hit worldwide, one of the most influential works of trans art ever produced. The movie, of course, was The Matrix. I'd also argue that it could easily have been a cinematic rendering of the most amazing Mage the Ascension campaign that the Wachowski sisters ever ran. In it, our hero, a closeted trans girl and aspiring virtual adept mage named Neo, is awakened to the truth that her reality is actually a digital hallucination, albeit a non-consensual one. The more deeply she comes to understand this, the more she is able to bend and break the rules of that simulation. Despite the efforts of the oppressive forces who benefit from keeping as many sleepers unaware of this reality as possible. Both The Matrix and Mage the Ascension are profoundly trans stories. In both, the central figures are people who have had to rely upon their own deep, internal, visceral understanding that the world as presented to them is wrong. In order to access the power they need to break free of the restrictions placed upon them, they have to assert their own deeply felt understanding of the truth, despite all of the evidence around them that is insisting that they must be mistaken, that what they believe must be impossible. And for some reason, I'm not advancing my slides. This is what it felt like growing up as a trans person in the 1980s, knowing that I wasn't what people thought I was, but lacking any language or agency to be able to identify what was wrong, let alone insist on correcting it. Morpheus's words ring loudly in my ears when I think about this. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You've felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. To awaken in mage terms, or to free your mind in the Matrix's terms, or to crack your egg in contemporary online trans terminology, one must embrace this truth, despite all evidence to the contrary and all of the pressure that the oppressive status quo places upon us. As the Oracle says to Neo, I want to tell you a little secret. Being the one is just like being in love. No one tells you you're in love. You just know it through and through, balls to bones. Now, there's no physiological test of transness. It's not something that a doctor or a therapist or any other agent of the status quo can tell you definitively. And especially for many trans people who transition later in life, like me, we need to first assert our gender identity before we are allowed to live it. Our identities begin as feelings that we struggle to recognize or share before we are allowed to manifest them as material reality. Transition is magic because it is the materialization of something that seems impossible until after it has happened. It is a story we tell about ourselves with conviction until eventually it simply becomes our reality. It isn't just trans people who are storying ourselves into reality. Everyone, to some extent, uses narrative as a tool for not just understanding the world, but for constituting that reality. In the interest of simplicity and to keep from getting bogged down in metaphysical or narratological minutiae, I'm going to take a step back and provide some working definitions of two key terms here so that we're all on the same page. When I discuss narrative or story, I'm referring to one of the most commonly accepted framings as popularized by film scholars David Bordwell and Kristen Thompson. Narrative is a sequence of events linked by cause and effect in time and space. When talking about reality, at least for the purposes of this presentation, I'm talking about both Husserl's phenomenological reality, which is reality as lived, sensed, perceived, and experienced, and Searle's social reality. Reality is constructed through the social interactions and unconscious agreements of groups of people. This version of reality is less about the raw underlying physics of the world and more about the ways in which we as humans must make sense of the world and our place in it. These two concepts converge in a 1987 article by Jerome Bruner called Life as Narrative, in which he writes, "We have no other way of describing lived time save in the form of narrative." Bruner argues that there is actually no practical distinction between what we experience and the stories that we tell about that experience. He writes, life in this sense is the same kind of construction of the human imagination as a narrative is. When somebody tells you his life, it is always a cognitive achievement rather than a through the clear crystal recital of something univocally given. In the end, it is a narrative achievement. There is no such thing psychologically as life itself. At very least, It is a selective achievement of memory recall. Beyond that, recounting one's life is an interpretive feat. Philosophically speaking, it is hard to imagine being a naive realist about life itself. To live within the world is to selectively attend to certain details, to attribute causal connections between events, and to interpret those details and connections in order to produce a situated meaning unique to our individual experience. Research into selective perception and attention shows that our brains cannot process all sensory input equally. If we tried, we'd be overwhelmed by sensory information to the point of being unable to function in the world. Instead, we prioritize certain inputs over others, often driven by our desires, our needs, and the context in which we're situated. So many of you may be familiar with videos like this. Let's see if this works.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go! I want everybody to count these.
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go! Oh, let me go back.
This is an awareness
test. YouTube, thank you. Our ability to perceive and process sensory information is influenced by our expectations. This means that the experienced reality that we inhabit exists as a unique pattern within our minds, one that is as much shaped by the stories we use to make sense of things as by any external input. Bruner writes, "The culturally shaped cognitive and linguistic processes that guide the self-telling of life narratives achieve the power to structure perceptual experience, to organize memory, to segment and purpose-build the very events of a life. In the end, we become the autobiographical narratives by which we tell about our lives. And given the cultural shaping to which I referred, we also become variants of the culture's canonical forms." There is physiological evidence that supports this idea. In 2017, Baldessano et al. Published an article entitled "Discovering Event Structure in Continuous Narrative Perception and Memory." In a study of brain activity among people experiencing and recounting stories, they write, "High-order event boundaries are coupled to increases in hippocampal activity, which predict pattern reinstatement during later free recall. These areas also show evidence of anticipatory reinstatement as subjects listen to a familiar narrative. Based on these results, we propose that brain activity is naturally structured into nested events, which form the basis of long-term memory representations." In other words, not only do we use narrative causality to structure how we store and later access information, but those patterns also structure how we anticipate and make sense of information. Thus, when I say that the stories we tell about our experiences shape our reality, I'm being quite literal. Narrative reasoning gives us a cognitive tool that is essential to constructing a shared social consensus about reality. We lack the ability to simply see into each other's minds, to know the thoughts, feelings, and experiences of others directly. And so we rely upon spoken language, written words, nonverbal communication, and other expressive forms to bridge that gap in understanding. The same narrative reasoning strategies that we use to structure and make sense of our experiences are the tools that we use to convey those experiences to other people and to come to understand the experiences that others have. This is how we take all of that overwhelming sensory input and structure it into Bordwell and Thompson's sequence of events connected by cause and effect in time and space. Narrative reasoning is fundamentally causal reasoning. What happened? Why did it happen? How did it happen? What does it mean? These are narrative questions, and answering them isn't a neutral or objective process. It's personal and situated. They give rise to the question, what might happen next? To speculate about the future, we inevitably use narrative reasoning once more. Narrative reasoning provides us with patterns of causality that allow us to anticipate, imagine, and evaluate potential futures by looking at the chain of causally linked events that we've constructed from our experiences. Now, there is a rich history of speculative research methods in science and philosophy. Thought experiments have played a pivotal role in how scientists communicate their insights, often providing a concrete, if fictional, scenario in which to explore possible theories, models, or concepts. Søren Hogvist described thought experiments as cognitive simulations that we run on our mental models of the world. Their fictionality doesn't prevent them from doing important epistemological work. In fact, it is often what makes a thought experiment the best method to explore certain ideas. For instance, Schrödinger's infamous cat scenario effectively illustrates how the presence of an observer impacts the ability of a particular quantum state being true or false, something that cannot be demonstrated via a direct experiment by virtue of the very phenomenon it is meant to illustrate. This story about a cat in a box that is simultaneously alive and dead until you open the box is broadly known, and even understood by non-scientists, while other aspects of quantum physics remain more obscure. Other speculative methods have become common in HCI and games as a technique for thinking more concretely about emerging technosocial futures. One of the more popular ones is design fiction, which Bruce Sterling defined in 2012 as the deliberate use of diegetic prototypes to suspend disbelief about change. The term diegetic prototypes comes from film scholar David Kirby, who coined it to account for the ways in which cinematic depictions of future technologies demonstrate to large public audiences a technology's need, viability, and benevolence. For those of you who aren't familiar with diegesis, a diegetic object exists within the reality of a fictional world, and design fiction then represents a technology within a narrative world in a way that makes an argument about the role of that technology within our society. One of the most successful examples of a diegetic prototype is the gestural interface depicted in 2001's Minority Report. The film's production designer, Alex McDowell, hired MIT researcher John Underkoffler to devise a gestural interaction schema for the pre-crime interface, drawing on his pre-existing work on gestural interaction. Underkoffler was a design researcher suddenly given access to the full power of Hollywood special effects to visualize how these interfaces might evolve beyond the rudimentary prototypes that were in development in his lab at the time. The result was a cinematic depiction of gestural computing that millions of people around the world saw. What had once been an obscure thread of user interface research suddenly became a commonplace vision for the future of computing. Kirby describes another real-world example of how a diegetic prototype was used to change public opinion about an emerging technology. In the early 1980s, a team of medical doctors and researchers led by Robert Jarvik and Denton Cooley designed the first artificial human heart, but were unable to convince anyone to volunteer to be the first recipient of this potentially life-saving technology. At the time, public anxiety around post-humanism and cyberneticism dominated the conversation around artificial organs. Would a person with a mechanical heart still be a person, people wondered? And so, Jarvik and his team signed on as science consultants to the 1981 film Threshold. The film showed the benevolence of this technology prior to being used in any actual surgeries. It positioned the artificial heart within a narrative. Kirby argues that Threshold played a pivotal role in changing public opinion about the surgery, so much so that 1 year later, Jarvik's team successfully transplanted the first artificial heart into a volunteer named Barney Clark. In these examples of thought experiments and design fiction, we see scientists doing something that I'm going to describe as a kind of magic. They have something that they know that is not yet widely accepted or understood within the broader consensus of reality, so it only exists locally for them. In order to move this truth from their local sphere into the more broadly accepted reality, they use storytelling techniques to conjure a vision of the world shaped by this truth known only to them. In doing so, they manifest that truth into the world. They essentially use narrative to make space for people to believe that something is possible that was previously unthinkable. It's important to point out here that there is often a misalignment between what science is able to observe, detect, and demonstrate, and what our social reality is able to integrate into itself. Humanity has a long history of treating scientists as witches or heretics. Galileo died under house arrest, accused of heresy by the Catholic Church because he championed a heliocentric model of the solar system that contradicted the religious consensus at the time. And of course, throughout Europe, women were burned as witches because they were knowledgeable about medicine, herbalism, and healing. In the examples I've shared, Minority Report was a design fiction about the future, while Threshold was about the present, which means it's time to discuss design fictions that are allohistorical, which is to say focused on imagining alternate pasts. My first example comes from a collaboration with geologists, climate scientists, information scientists, and artists. We asked the question, how would the last 40 years of history have played out if we had run out of oil in the 1970s? The resulting allohistorical scenario, dubbed Coal World, forced us to envision and unpack the effects of peak oil in a context where we couldn't imagine some as yet uninvented technology swooping in to save the day. My next example is how the steampunk subculture playfully combines emerging contemporary technologies with the aesthetics of Victorian England. Steampunk's alternate histories focused a critical lens on issues of class, industrial manufacturing, and material culture. The artifacts created by steampunk makers reflect their search for alternatives to the sterility and soullessness of mass-produced technology. However, steampunk as a subculture struggled to reconcile this with the problematic colonial, racial, and Eurocentric politics of the past. As an antidote to this example, I want to consider how Black Panther's vision of the technologically advanced African nation of Wakanda recenters power in the global South in ways that challenge our contemporary culture of neoliberal, colonialist white supremacy. By recentering historically oppressed cultures within the narrative via allohistorical speculation, Black Panther succeeds at something called restorying. Restorying is a Black womanist storytelling practice described by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas and Amy Stornayulo, in which marginalized people narrate the self into existence by bending or otherwise reimagining the past. Restorying allows oppressed people to recenter their voices within the narrative of their social worlds, despite living in a world that is seeking to silence them. This act of recentering themselves in the narrative can help oppressed people reclaim agency, autonomy, and self-determination that are often denied to them. Mia Shaw describes how this operates among high school students of color engaged in a process of designing electronic textile quilts. She writes, "Restorying can provide an opportunity for youth to not only reflect on the dominant narratives of CS, the ones that restrict who can and cannot participate, but to also use computational tools and practices to reimagine new connections to the field that are reflective of their intersecting social and cultural identities." Restorying provides a potential analytical framework for understanding youth of color's identification with CS through the development of counter-narratives. Further, restorying provides a possible praxis for transformative action as youth reimagine alternate futures. Returning to Jerome Bruner, we find support for this idea that restorying has the potential to shape not just the present tense narrative of self that students experience, but also to inform how future stories might play out. I believe that the ways of telling and the ways of conceptualizing that go with them become so habitual that they finally become recipes for structuring experience itself, for laying down roots into memory, for not only guiding the life narrative up to the present, but directing it into the future. I have argued that life as led is inseparable from a life as told, or more bluntly, a life is not how it was, but how it is reinterpreted and told and retold. It is here that all the threads that we've been weaving through this talk start to resolve into a clearer picture, and so it's time to look at how these ideas of magic, consensus reality, life as narrative, allohistorical speculations, and restorying connect to games. What is CF? I don't know what is CF. I'm not sure. CS maybe? I was talking about computer science. That might be it. Transgender game designer Avery Alder creates games that insist that you believe in impossible things. She argues that when the world is arranged to tell a story that robs you of any power, it is up to you to instead choose to tell yourself stories that restore that power. Much like Twain, Alder's games invite their players to inhabit alternative selves as they move through their daily lives. She writes, The world we live in likes to tell us that some of us are not powerful or worthy. It leaps to tell us this. Speaking as a queer person, a trans person, and a depressed person, it is easy to buy into the paradigm that you are not powerful or worthy. When you see others succeeding by metrics that you fail at, when you see others exercising forms of power that you don't have access to, it's easy to conclude that your own self-actualization is beyond reach, that it is impossible. If we're already internalizing impossibility, if we're already letting impossibility define us, then why not choose the impossibilities where we are strong beyond measure, where our wounds heal overnight, where we can change forms as needed? The works and variations on your body, Alder's collection of single-player pervasive games, were created while she was exploring the possibility that she might be transgender. In the same way that The Matrix takes on deeper meaning when read through the lens of the Wachowski sisters' transness, Alder's work must be read through the lens of her transness. In her game Teen Witch, for example, Alder asserts that in order to play this game, you must become a teenage girl who is a witch. If you are not these things already, you must become them before playing. She offers advice on how to become a teenage girl, inviting players to start with a fiction and explore it until it becomes real. She writes, "There is an important truth about the world that must be understood and trusted if this game is to work. That something is a fiction doesn't make it any less real." Teen Witch isn't just a game about doing magic. It's a game that makes doing the actual magic of transness playful and possible. I see my own journey of questioning and discovery in Alder's words. I recognize the phenomenology of exploring my past through the lens of what if in Lee's Twain. Both games use an allohistorical fictional imaginary to create space for the player to inhabit an otherwise impossible present. They invite the player to re-story themselves through play. They exist within what Margaret Mackey once described as the subjunctive mode of a game. The subjunctive tense is the tense of possibility. It is the tense of as if. We play as if we had a magical twin, or as if we were a teenage girl. For however long we inhabit the space of subjunctive possibility, we might ignore all the things that might burst the reality bubble, or magic circle, that contains our play. We don't just suspend our disbelief, we actively create counterbelief. Returning for a moment to the concept of restoring, it's important to understand that these acts of reimagining ourselves into a reality where we are no longer limited by the boundaries that have contained us don't exist independent of the prevailing social consensus. For the students in Shaw's study, there are multiple barriers to their success. They face real, structural, material, political, and economic oppression. However, most of the time, these oppressive systems are perpetuated by people who themselves don't realize that they are complicit in a white supremacist patriarchal hegemony that rewards that unthinking complicity. One of the invisible mechanisms by which people police and enforce the normative social order is described by Dorothy Holland and her co-authors as figured worlds. By figured world, then, we mean a socially and culturally constructed realm of interpretation in which particular characters and actors are recognized, significance is assigned to certain acts, and particular outcomes are valued over others. These collective as-if worlds are socio-historic, contrived interpretations or imaginations that mediate behavior and so inform participants' outlooks. Figured worlds are identity spaces that we often negotiate implicitly, where our individual belonging or exclusion is not entirely within our control. Figured worlds theory highlights the ways in which we don't have full agency over our social identities. For Shaw's students, one of the biggest obstacles they face is that the figured world they inhabit is one where people who look and speak like them are not admitted into the identity space of engineer or programmer or game designer. I did a quick search when I was putting this talk together to see how the algorithm reflects the figured world of game designer. Of the 40 people who appear in the 28 images, only 3 aren't white or light-skinned, and only 9 are women or femme presenting. A full third of those women have white men mansplaining their jobs to them. So, figured worlds are stereotypical. They are the simplifying social construct that we use to organize and distinguish between groups of people. We all inhabit multiple overlapping figured worlds in our lives, often playing different roles in each. The figured worlds that we inhabit are a kind of unconscious collective imaginary, a shared social consensus that assigns values, possibilities, and expectations to people according to a baseline narrative that might be best described as the dominant paradigm or the normative social order. For people who fall outside of the normative social order, who violate the assumptions of what is normal, the expectations associated with normalcy can be oppressive, limiting, or even deadly. Restorying, then, is a strategy used by people outside of the normative social order for reclaiming some of that lost agency by replacing an oppressive or limiting imaginary with an emancipatory and empowering one. LARP designer and scholar Janaya Kemper coined the term emancipatory bleed to describe how LARP can be used to help players who live with a double consciousness or a fractured identity due to other marginalizations. Experiencing emancipatory bleed in LARP can help mitigate some of the negative effects of complex marginalization. And here I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but bleed is a concept from Nordic LARP in which the emotions of the player are influenced by and or influence the emotions of the character that they are performing. And so emancipatory bleed might be described as role-playing a character that overcomes trauma and marginalization and experiencing a sense of overcoming your own trauma and marginalization in the process. In an essay entitled "We Deserve Legends," Kemper explains why this is so important, not just for her as an individual, but as a way to resist oppressive systems. I am my own mythos. I really am my own mythos. I play to achieve liberation from a society that tells me not to dream. We need to see ourselves. We need to see pictures of us in the foreground, not the background. Just as important is that others need to see us. We need to see women of color as heroes. We need to see folks who are gender fluid. We need to see folks who are trans. We need to see the world as it is and not what we have been told. This fits beautifully with Avery Alder's idea of choosing our own impossibilities as marginalized people, and why her idea of imbuing a fiction with importance and meaning is such potent magic. When I was faced with the possibility that I was trans enough to transition, something that I had contemplated since I was a teenager, but which was always clearly impossible, I found myself thinking subjunctively. First, it was, what if I'm actually a girl? And then, what if I've always been a girl? Soon it was, what if I started hormones? What if I like it? The more time I spent allowing myself to experience how it felt to entertain that possibility, to set aside all the reasons why it was impossible, the better I felt when I thought about myself. As it turns out, cis men don't feel this way when they do this. Who knew? When I started to transition, I struggled to process the deep trauma I'd accumulated from decades of not being seen as myself. My transition has left me with a head full of memories that don't feel like they belong to me. But even worse, large portions of my childhood are just blank spots. This is due to a process known as dissociative amnesia, one of the ways that our brains protect us from complex trauma. I carried this sheet of paper with the ritual instructions on it in my wallet for years, eventually transferring it to a jewelry box and keeping it by my bedside. When I started my transition, I took comfort in this piece of evidence that I wasn't delusional in my conviction that I'd always felt like a girl, despite having lost so many memories to dissociative amnesia. Most of my magic practice is informal, a way of orienting myself to the world, of recognizing my obligations to others, of connecting myself to my environment. But this ritual was big magic. It was slow magic, and my presence here today is all the proof that I need that it was real magic. Now, on this side of transition, I am doing a new kind of subjunctive gender magic. I'm looking back at my childhood and trying to reconcile the few memories that have survived with the knowledge of who I am now. Much like how Twain and Teen Witch restory the identity of the player, I'm restorying my own history, because doing so allows me to reclaim some of the girlhood that I missed out on growing up. And because I am a game designer and a witch, I have created Forest Child, my own private allohistorical game to restory my childhood memories and make them my own again. This game draws substance from my fractured memories of childhood and then imbues them with a truth that I couldn't articulate at the time. I grew up surrounded by acres of New England forest. In so many ways, it was a magical place to live, filled with mystery, exploration, and imagination. As a little girl, I used to disappear into the woods for days at a time, emerging for meal times covered in pine sap and mud, a mess of tangled curly hair, mosquito bites, and skinned knees. Where did this wild daughter of the woods come from? My father would laugh, picking leaves out of my hair, and I'd shrug. I'm a wood fairy, I'd explain, around a mouthful of food, and soon I was back in my element. I'd tend to the babbling brook that ran through the woods. A fallen tree became a time machine where the further down the trunk I walked, the farther back in time I'd travel, until at last I could imagine I was a princess, traipsing through the forest, hoping I'd meet a talking bird or squirrel. I knew the secret spots where I could dance in fairy rings, imagining my twirling skirt as trailing fairy wings. I started playing this game right after I finished playing Twain, seeking to reproduce some of the potent magical spell cast by that game. As games go, Forest Child has only one mechanic: to remember correctly. Through this healing fiction, this playful act of restorying, I am reclaiming some of the girlhood that was my birthright, but was denied to me. I am practicing a very personal kind of magic. At the beginning of this talk, I made the claim that transition is magic because it is the materialization of something that seems impossible until after it has happened. I described it as a story we tell about ourselves with conviction until eventually it simply becomes our reality. It is a claim that I expected to be met with some skepticism. After all, magic is something we're used to thinking of as fictional, and we often mean fiction to mean not real. But I'm hoping that the examples I've provided and the theories I've introduced over the last 30 minutes have opened you up to the possibility that fiction is not just very real, but in fact that it is everything. We lead lives stitched together with stories. We inhabit a world of overlapping, competing fictions. We rely upon narrative to not just structure our communications, but to shape our memories, our identities, and our futures. It is a profoundly human kind of magic, and it is invisible to most people. It isn't until we need to tell a story that seems impossible that we discover how powerful this is. For those of us who step outside of the approved and accepted narrative, this kind of magic suddenly becomes a lifeline. We become witches, whether we mean to or not. Becoming a witch is much less about dancing skyclad beneath the full moon, collecting candles, crystals, and herbs, and casting spells than it is about stepping outside of the normative social order. To fully unpack how this idea crystallized for me, I need to tell a story about my relationship to a woman I view as one of my witch ancestors, the interdisciplinary avant-garde filmmaker, poet, photographer, scholar, activist, choreographer, and anthropologist, Maya Deren. Deren is best known for her short career as an experimental filmmaker and choreographer in the 1940s, and for her extended accounts of her time studying dance and ritual practices in Haiti in the late 1940s and early 50s. In 1947, anthropologists Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson entrusted Deren with the task of editing several rolls of film footage they had taken on an ethnographic trip to Bali. She kept a notebook of this period in her life, where it is evident that she was often intellectually at odds with her collaborators, an intellectual outsider in their circles. At one point, Maya is hosting a party where Margaret Mead offhandedly refers to her as a witch, unknowingly triggering an almost existential crisis in her. Mead and Bateson, informed by their anthropological studies of how their Balinese subjects conceptualize witches, associate them with acts of intentional evil and superstitions such as eating babies. And yet, Deren knows two things without knowing how she knows them. First, witches are not evil. And second, she herself is a witch, or at least is comfortable being seen as a witch. She spends the next few days interrogating this knowledge as it sprang unbidden from her lips at the party. She realizes that once she sets aside the moralistic perspective of her colleagues, that she feels intense kinship with the Balinese witches. She recognizes herself in them. I first encountered Deren's film work in graduate school, but it wasn't until reading her 1947 notebooks a year and a half ago that she became a significant figure in my own development as a witch. Reading her reaction to Mead's comment electrified me because I knew how it felt to have someone casually call me out on something true about myself that I hadn't yet faced. It had happened when a trans friend of a friend asked me if I'd considered starting hormones. I answered unthinkingly, yes, I think I want to try them, and in that moment discovered that I meant it, even though I hadn't previously admitted it to myself. It happened when an autistic friend asked me if I'd ever considered that I might be autistic, and I instinctively responded, yes, I'm pretty certain I am, before realizing exactly how deeply I'd buried that knowledge. These moments when suddenly I was facing something about myself that my own internalized transphobia and ableism, those intensely fraught stereotypes had unknowingly been perpetuating, had kept me from knowing, laid bare and glistening and painful after decades of living in denial. Darren's existential crisis leads her to write about witches in terms that capture something about how my own experiences of the world changed when I came out as trans and when I realized I was autistic. A witch is actually a successful, in the sense of surviving, deviant. You have a cultural, ideological, social, whatnot pattern, which is, for that society in question, normal. And importantly, this is understood as a synonym for natural. Most people survive because they conform to these patterns, because they behave normally. Then suddenly you have someone not behaving normally. And usually they cannot survive, since having rejected the system and its support, they go under, so to speak, and are referred to as subnormal, maladjusted, and other such terms which have a negative relation to the standard norm. But then suddenly you get a deviant which survives. And since it does not draw its support from the normal pattern, and since the normal people only consider themselves as natural, that deviant is understood as drawing its support from unknown or supernatural sources. This independence of the accepted natural pattern upon which the normals are dependent jibes, of course, with the universal attributes of witches as being solitary and owning cats, since cats share this independence. The price exacted by the normative social order on anyone who deviates is steep. Neurodivergent people and trans people are far more likely to die from suicide than our allistic and cisgender peers. And it isn't because we're inherently more suicidal. It's because we must navigate a social world that treats us as less worthy of life. Living long enough to be here to give this talk sometimes feels like a kind of magic. Is it any wonder that just surviving as a deviant is sufficient cause to be accused of witchcraft? Darren continues, but it goes further than that. For the survival of the witch, independent of the accepted pattern, means that she is simultaneously a manifestation of a non-normal order which is apparently integrated and strong enough to sustain life. But it is characteristic of the normal that he cannot conceive of the simultaneous existence of dualities, that his way is the only possible way, and consequently the sheer existence of another order capable of sustaining life is a threat and a source, potentially, of destruction. They are afraid, for they think, if we cannot survive without our order, how can she survive in solitude? Hers must indeed be a very powerful order to exist so independently, without all the intercooperation and individual compromise that we have to go through to survive. And if it is so powerful, then it could destroy us. We must try to destroy it first. The backlash against witches she describes perfectly mirrors the ways that I experience the inescapable transphobia, homophobia, and ableism that still permeate our society. More than that, it parallels two of the examples I opened this talk with. The same conflict between witches and the normative social order that Darren describes can be seen with Mage the Ascension and the conflict between the awakened mages and the consensus of the sleeping majority. It is evident in the conflict between Neo and the agents of the system in the Matrix. This sense of feeling yourself at odds with normative social systems is at the core of how I experience my own neurodivergence, my queerness, and my transness. As a witch, I might not have set out to become an activist, but activism became necessary just to survive. Something as simple as being called by the name and pronouns I use in my daily life required that I invest years of effort and energy into advocating for inclusive name change policies in academic publishing. In a period of less than 3 years, I built a coven of fellow witches to cast this particular spell over the publishing world, and we collectively transformed policies at every major publisher on the planet. Our magical tools were not candles or potions, they were stories. Stories we told honestly, loudly, and unflinchingly. Collaborating with my siblings at the Name Change Policy Working Group, I've seen my stories transform the prevailing consensus of an entire industry to help not just transgender people, but all people who change their names, whether it be due to marriage or divorce, religious conversion, or just for fun. In her introduction to the excellent book Missing Witches, Amanda Yates Garcia, the Oracle of Los Angeles, emphasizes the fundamentally political nature of being a witch in terms that echo the language I've been invoking in this talk. She writes, Many of us have been told that witches don't exist, even though we knew in our hearts that we were one. It's a special kind of erasure to be told that the thing you know you are does not exist. But witches are real. We exist. I appreciate the author's willingness to unpack their own biases and blind spots here, to look at racism and internalized sexism and colonialism and continue the work of unsettling. Because witch work is anti-racist work, and anti-racist work is anti-capitalist work. And in a way, the inquisitors of old Europe were right. Witches want to bring this whole monstrous system down. We won't stop until we do. She continues, missing witches helps us to understand that magic is real and that it is something we can touch and feel. It is something we can create. Magic, the ability to transform reality according to our will, is available to us right now. We are not at the mercy of hostile forces. Today, in order to thrive, we need to remember that we have power. Then we have to use it. This at last brings me to games and game design, topics I'm confident this audience probably knows quite well. So let's connect some dots, starting with the magic circle, a concept first invoked by Huizinga and Homo Ludens in 1938, and then popularized within contemporary game design by Eric Zimmerman and Katie Salen in the Rules of Play in 2004. Huizinga's initial concept was written to describe how games suspended the logics of the normal in order to function. All play moves and has its being within a playground marked off beforehand, either materially or ideally deliberately, or as a matter of course. Just as there is no formal difference between play and ritual, so the consecrated spot cannot be formally distinguished from the playground. The arena, the card table, the magic circle, the temple, the stage, the screen, the tennis court, the court of justice, etc., are all in form and function playgrounds, i.e., forbidden spots, isolated, hedged round, hallowed, within which special rules obtain. All are temporary worlds within the ordinary world, dedicated to the performance of an act apart. Like magic and play, like magic, play and games are set apart from the normative social order, or rather, they are carved out of the mundane world through assertions of meaning. Making a game is, at its simplest, a decision to assign meanings to things that deviate from those agreed upon by the unspoken social consensus. Getting anyone else to play that game requires magic, at least at first, because one must convince another person to set aside their commitments to the normative social order for at least a short while. This is what Bernard Suits meant when he described the illusory attitude. To play a game is to attempt to achieve a specific state of affairs using only means permitted by rules, where the rules prohibit the use of more efficient in favor of less efficient means, and where the rules are accepted just because they make possible such an activity. The magic circle of a game gives people permission to deviate from the norm in ways they might never contemplate outside of play. If I pick up a ball in my daily life, I wouldn't expect to suddenly be tackled by someone wearing a football uniform. But if I pick up a football on a football field while playing a game of football, then I better be prepared for someone to try to tackle me. In his dissertation work, one of my PhD students, Jeffrey Bryan, has been applying this logic to spaces where deviation from the norm is safe and accepted, such as karaoke or trick-or-treating on Halloween. Karaoke creates a space in public where people are encouraged to sing loudly, an activity that could easily be classified as disturbing the peace when enacted outside the magic circle of the karaoke bar. Similarly, Halloween in America is a single night out of the year when a whole constellation of deviant activities are not just permitted, but encouraged. These examples show that the most successful games do not remain apart from our social order. Instead, our consensus stretches around them, absorbs them, and normalizes them, while still holding them apart from the rules of daily life. And, like a cell in an organism, the membrane separating games from the rest of life is permeable, meaning meanings can pass back and forth across it, informing both realities. To call back a term from Nordic LARP, these things can bleed across the gap between game logic and mundane logic. It is this transfer of meaning across the boundary of the magic circle that gives games so much potential as sites for real witchcraft and real change making. In many ways, I don't distinguish between magic and game design. Both practices use rules, systems of symbols, attribution of arbitrary meaning, and ritualized structured behavior to carve out moments in time and space that take on significance beyond the ordinary. The rules of games and magic are freeing. They are emancipatory because they empower us to break free from the oppression of ordinary, normal life. In all of the ideas that I've discussed this morning, life as narrative, restorying, figured worlds, the subjunctive mode, emancipatory bleed, historical fictional imaginaries, successful deviance, witchcraft, I see a seed to grow a trans game studies that doesn't just represent trans people's experiences, but instead recognizes how games, play, and story are entangled in the ways that we discover ourselves, confront and process our traumas, and defy the impossibilities imposed upon us by the oppressive normative social order. If you take one thing from this talk, please consider that the things that you believe are impossible to change can indeed be changed. Please know that as people concerned with meaningful and transformative play, you have access to a powerful magic, should you choose to use it. And so, to close, I'd like to share how my experience playing Twain ended. I played Twain during the first few months of my gender transition. It was devastating, inspiring, profound, and emotional. The game allowed me to confront the many ways in which I had run away from my gender identity in my past. It gave me a framework to begin to redeem a childhood that already was growing fraught with half-remembered trauma of dysphoria and disconnection. My final moments of playing Twain happened on a public lookout in my suburban Irvine neighborhood as the sun was setting. I stood facing the west as autumn winds whipped around me, and I begged for my lost sister to call me. I paced. I cried. When my phone rang, I answered in a broken voice and promised her that I would not forget my own magic this time, the gift that I'd thrown away as a child, the gift that my first puberty had stolen from me. I promised her that this time I would not let anyone else tell me who I was supposed to be. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking with you about these ideas.
Okay, so you just made me cry right at the end there.
Yeah, me too. I'm sorry. It
Don't
happens.
even apologize, please. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah, I make myself cry when I do this talk. Should I stop the screen share so we can have a, yeah, do that. How do I stop the screen share? Come on, Zoom. There we are.
While we're doing that, if anybody has any other questions that they'd like to ask, please feel free to put it in the Q&A section. I will relay them when they are there. Otherwise, I will relay my own plentiful ones. Yeah, no, really, thank you so much for such a beautiful talk and such an insightful one. I have so many notes and many notes here, but I'll give the first question to somebody who was asking about the matrix here. They were asking, could you talk more about why you see the character of Neo as a trans girl as opposed to non-binary? I acknowledge that it's not central to your larger talk. They're just curious.
So I don't know whether the Wachowski sisters have gone on record as saying that Neo is a trans woman, but it is the headcanon for a lot of trans women who have spent a long time sort of unpacking and deconstructing it, and it's one that I subscribe to. Neo is, I think, Neo and Trinity are the most obvious author insertion characters in the Matrix. Like, they are the characters that are most clearly the Wachowskis putting themselves into the film. And so I think that it's reasonable to extend that to Neo as a result of sort of knowing what I know about the Wachowski sisters. It's also a pretty consistent and common reading when you look at sort of trans interpretations and critiques of the films.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with The Matrix. I was when I first saw it, literally in the cinemas, and I was the first movie I watched many times. I can tell you
Likewise.
that Lily Wachowski did actually confirm that
Yeah,
Neo
I think
is
she's gone on record.
Yeah, in 2020, I have the article open.
Excellent.
So to answer that person's
Amazing.
question. Is there anybody else who has questions? Otherwise, I will just ask my own. In the meantime, I might, if that's okay. Yeah, so much of this is so interesting, and I don't even know where to start. I'm so what I wrote right at the bottom. Maybe I'll start here. What I wrote here was magic equals fiction, but fiction is how we construct reality. So magic is real. That's what I'm going to take away from that for a start. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this notion of perception and changing public opinion that you talked about. You mentioned Black Panther amongst other films. The Matrix is another. there's so many conversations in game studies, but also like film studies and like any other studies that about this notion of like good representation, positive representation, the impact that that can have on culture and community. I'm curious by this perspective, what do you think might be better representations for this? Are there formats? Are there specific
Hmm.
types of representation that might be good?
Um, I mean, there's a lot of different things I could say about this. I did a project back as a graduate student on serious games and behavior change, where we looked at how people actually adopt their views, how people come to believe what they believe and come to feel what they feel. And it was fascinating because the sort of prevailing sort of common understanding of why people are the way they are, or think the way they think, or do what they do, is because the information space that they inhabit, it creates room for them to do that, and there's a deficit in that information space that doesn't create space for them to do other things or be other things. And it's known as the information deficit model, the idea being that we simply have to tell people right information and then they'll change their behavior. But of course, we know that isn't what happens. Like, we know that people's behavior is often more associated with tribalism, with community belonging, with emotions, with visceral gut things, with things that happen before cognition, that happen before people are actually engaged with facts, right? And so it's not enough to just like it's not enough to just give people facts about the world. If you want to change their behavior, you have to do something else. And it gets even more complex when you enter into spaces where there isn't a known path to a better world, where there isn't like a clear cut, you can just say, this is the right thing to do, we're all going to do it, because we live in a pluralistic society where what's right for one group of people isn't necessarily right for another group of people. And so in order to produce lasting real behavior change, you need to go beyond simply telling people that they need to change their behavior. You need to find a way to enlist people into a process of transformation that they're buying into in some way, that they're invested in, where they're not simply, becoming defensive because they've been told that everything they think and feel is wrong, but they're actually able to arrive at their own conclusions. They're able to participate in the process of reaching a better conclusion than the one that they started with. And the person I worked with was a man named John Robinson, who had won a Nobel Prize for his work on climate change and building consensus in small communities around how to approach complex climate change issues. And the work that he did was built on the idea of what was known as an emerging, what was it? It was a consensus based process, right? Where it was known as emergent dialogue, where rather than starting with a preconceived notion of where you wanted to end up, you had to bring people together and sort of put them, like heads up against each other, and let their own biases interact with each other, and let them discover each other as human, and let them learn the consequences of their choices on each other, and recognize that the interactions between people are the result of this giant dynamic consensus that we all live inside of. And so it's not enough to just sort of put a trans character in a CW show and assume that, like, we're going to eliminate transphobia. It's that people need to experience us as human. Like, they need to experience difference as humanity. They need to be able to move past that process of objectifying, of iconifying, of abstracting us into some sort of, boogeyman or deviant, and instead recognize the shared humanity that we all have. And that's, you can't just do that with representation. Like, it's part of it. It's you need information, you need to put new information into the conversation, but it can't just stop there. It has to actually reach people at a place that isn't about whatever they consider to be true or untrue, and is instead about how they feel viscerally. And so I think as a trans person in the world, I struggle a lot with the fact that most of the arguments that transphobes deploy against us aren't actually grounded in ideas, they're grounded in a visceral reaction of what they perceive as wrong about us. And they then take that visceral reaction of disgust and create a bunch of ideas to justify and explain and define that reaction. But you, unless you're approaching the actual like visceral negative reaction, like there's no point in engaging with the ideas. There's no point in arguing with a transphobe about my own humanity. I don't need to have an argument with somebody about whether I am entitled to exist as a human in the world, because the no idea is going to change whether or not they're disgusted by me. They have to find a way to experience me with a lens that is something other than visceral disgust and aversion. And yeah, I think narrative is a way of doing that, because narrative isn't only about ideas. It's not like a list of facts, but instead it brings you into it. It creates a world. It allows you to inhabit a world. And so storying and restorying are really powerful because they make space for people to experience in ways that aren't just, informational, but instead of visceral. That's why I
Wow,
love
thank
LARP. That's why I'm getting into
yeah,
LARP right now.
sure, right? Because of the embodied visceral nature of the
Yep.
narrative and being able to experience that humanity in person. I I have so much I want to ask you about that in relation to visibilities, but I'm not going to do that just yet because I have a question here from someone. I'm going to ask that, and then if no one else put anything else in the Q&A, then I'll keep asking about visibilities and other things. The question I have here is, how do you navigate consensus reality's resistance to magic, especially in the academia or the academy?
Ooh. Um, I mean, I'm leaving academia, probably. So I'm going somewhere else. It's interesting. I have a student right now who is studying how magic has been represented in games, and looking at sort of the history of magical systems in games, the lens of systems theory, and looking at the ways in which it's kind of become operationalized by sort of Cold War thinking around systems of cyberneticism. And it's fascinating because he's found a way to talk about magic in academia that other academics respond to and are into. Um, I'm sorry, what was the question is not showing up on my Q&A.
Sorry, I was sent this one separately. The question was,
Uh,
how do you navigate consensus reality's resistance to magic, especially in academy?
I mean, yeah, how do you change the consensus? How do you alter the consensus of the sleepers, as it were? Um, you make it real. Like ideally, like by the time the magic you do becomes real, people don't think of it as magic anymore. Um, and that's what we've seen consistently with design fiction, with activism, with sort of the spread of powerful ideas through stories, that there's almost a process of disenchantment that happens, that things stay magical as long as they feel impossible, and the more possible they feel, the less they seem magical, because we tend to associate magic with mystery, with impossibility, with something that's out of reach, that's ephemeral. And so it's this slow process. It's like the frog in the pot. You slowly acclimate people to the ideas until eventually they just sort of take them for granted, and suddenly they've become mundane. They stop being magical thinking, and they just become the new consensus, which is constantly revising itself and updating itself.
Someone in chat asked, what was the name of the individual who's come up with a good narrative for magic?
Oh, I didn't name him. This is
figured.
Mikhail Sabag. He's one of my PhD students right now, who's in the process of finishing. His comprehensive exam is in 2 days. So wish him luck.
Oh, good luck.
Send good vibes. He'll do great. It's good work.
Absolutely. We'll send good magic. We have a question here in the Q&A. As a game design student and aspiring artist, I want to enter the industry well-equipped to tackle things I might not necessarily understand or have heard of. What behaviors or tools or mindsets might help me tackle understanding cultures and identities I might know nothing about?
I mean, play is central to this. Like playing in spaces where you're forced to be challenged by perspectives that you might not encounter in your daily life. Conversations are good. Like there's really no substitute for for actually encountering other people and other humans. Like there's like the ways in which we encounter each other are narrative ways. Like we use story to structure ideas so we can then convey them to each other. And so we have this tool at our disposal that allows us to take stuff from inside our own brains and sort of plant it in other people's brains. Like I think I was talking before we started about how writing is a kind of magic, because you take your own words and you create a little clone of them inside the minds of whoever reads them. And so you're using language as a way of infecting other people with your ideas, like a virus. And that is a kind of magic. And so it's like there's no substitute for living and experiencing and talking to people. I don't like have a good like simple answer to like how do I expand my horizons aside from like get out of your comfort zone, like find people that you wouldn't ordinarily talk with, and then do the work, because there's the corollary to this is that marginalized folks are always asked to do a bunch of this sort of epistemic labor for people who are more privileged, because more privileged people are typically very skeptical of the experiences of oppression that marginalized people experience because they haven't experienced them themselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a question here that might be somewhat related, I suppose. I find the idea of a close connection between magic and role playing very interesting. It's been something I've thought about and I think experiences during my last LARP year. But how do you use it in a conscious manner?
So it's about intent. I mean, like this is now we're getting into like how do you do magic, and so I'm gonna sort of take a step back from that and say how do you cook? How do you cook well? Because they're the same thing. And this is the metaphor that I didn't put into the talk that I didn't have time for, which is that if you've ever cooked before, say you're learning how to cook, you typically would go to a recipe. And a recipe has specifications for the things that you do in order to achieve the outcome, in this case, a meal. But anybody who has cooked with any experience at all knows that there are lots of things you do in the kitchen that don't get put into the recipe. The recipe, by its nature, is underspecified, right? It's the introduction to the idea of the cooking, but the actual cooking act itself involves all of the situated knowledge. It involves knowing your tools, knowing your kitchen, where you are in the world, which ingredients do you have access to, what time of year it is it, what is fresh and what isn't. It's highly specific, it's highly contextual. You learn how to use your senses to perceive when something is cooked enough or overcooked. There's all this subtle nuance to the actual practice of cooking, and really skillful cooks can do a lot of stuff that isn't specified in the recipe. They look at the recipe and they know, okay, that's my starting point. I'm going to do these things when I'm cooking. And really skillful cooks will synthesize, a dozen recipes and then create their own from the general knowledge they've experienced from them. And people at the highest level of cooking will just have a desire to eat a thing and will go to their cupboard and find ingredients that will allow them to make something that satisfies that need. And their understanding of their context and their situation, their senses and their ingredients and the tools and processes and techniques allows them to do that. And there is a material, tangible difference. You can tell the difference between something that a beginner cook has cooked following a recipe and an expert cook has done. The subtle craft knowledge of implicit understanding results in a material, perceptible result. And yet, a person who does that better dish often cannot take that imperceptible knowledge and retranslate it into a recipe. You can only formalize it up to a certain point. Magic is the same way. You can read books of spells. You can read about herbs. You can read about the history of magic. You can learn about the lives of witches. You can learn ritual practice, but all of that changes when you're doing it. Like there's all these things about doing magic that are embodied, are situated, are implicit, are intuitive, are sensory. And that stuff doesn't come from the books. That stuff comes from practice, from building your intuition, from developing your senses, from learning your own context, from learning your situation. And in the same way that there is a material difference in the outcome between magical practice that happens when you're simply following instructions, magical practice that grows out of experience and intuition and connection results in a different material outcome, at least insofar as how you experience the world and move through it.
Yeah, So fascinated with that because it's so experiential in so many ways
It's
and
it's ineffable. And it's like it's hard because we're
ineffable.
talking about ineffability, right? We're talking
Yes.
about this thing that it can't, like, you can systematize parts of it, but it resists systematization. Like there is know how that exceeds the know what that we can convey. um Stories help us get around some of that. Stories are one of the few information forms that can convey ineffability in a way that instructions cannot, which again gets us into this information deficit model. um,
I'm going to ask you all about that, but I'm going to let other people talk. I have a question here. I definitely understand the importance of narrative is reality for trans identity, but I'm worried about how it could be weaponized by malign narratives. Any
I mean,
thoughts
it
on
has
this?
been. It has
Yes,
been. I
yeah.
mean, this is what's happening right now in the United
Mm.
States. The folks that want to assert a different narrative over reality are very, very, very good at it. Like, there's a reason why the Supreme Court was able to overturn Roe versus Wade in June. There's a reason why states like Texas and Florida are doing the things that they're doing to trans people. Like and I don't want to go into that in depth because it's just depressing and sad and hard to deal with as a trans person. But we are flat-footed. Like, we are far behind the curve. Like, the forces of oppression, the forces of the normative social order already know that controlling their narrative and controlling the story is what allows them to create the reality they want, and they have been using it with precision and calculation for decades. Like the neoliberal agenda, the like like weird fundamentalist, like biblical natural order folks, there are, like, the reason, like, Fox News has been such an effective force for galvanizing the right is because they don't give a shit about anything but their own narrative. They're not interested in doing anything other than telling a story that supports the worldview they're trying to perpetuate, and they do it with discipline and rigor and consistency to a degree that the rest of us are not nearly as good at. Like, this is like, this gets into my own politics. Like, I get so frustrated with leftist and liberal infighting because we get so invested in the minutia of making certain that we are right that we lose control of the narrative, because we're sitting over here with this plurality of overlapping, intersecting, competing narratives, and we're trying to pit that up against one singular focused narrative that only wants one reality and is willing to say or do anything to get it. And so, like, yeah, we are already living in the shadows of a world where conservative, oppressive, fascist people are using narrative to construct and justify a reality which gives them power. And they use narrative to create and enforce and maintain power. And it reinforces the powerlessness of all of the other views in the world, all the other perspectives. Um, yeah, I could rant about this for a long time, but I'm not gonna.
Yes, it's okay. I'm avoiding those questions too. I'm tremendously sad and sorry to hear that. But perhaps I can give you something a little bit more hopeful, if you don't
Hmm.
mind. I have a wonderful question
Absolutely.
here. What could be your dream outcomes of giving this presentation to people?
So I have this fantasy, or this story that I tell myself about giving this talk, where I imagine myself in a really large room of people, um, and as I'm giving this talk, suddenly, like, mages and witches and will workers within the room start to awaken to their power, and suddenly stuff just changes in the room, and, like, reality changes in the room. I have this idea of, like, this talk and these ideas as a tool for a kind of mass awakening, where people who have believed themselves powerless and believed themselves limited in their ability to affect the kinds of change that they need to exist in the world suddenly recognize that not only is it possible for them to affect that change, but it is necessary and it is essential and it is critical. I love the idea of, like, more of us awakening to this, of awakening to this power, that, because, like, we've been victimized by people who are using this kind of power against us for our entire lives. And so, like, there's you know, there's economic power, there is cultural power, there's social power, there's the power of the drive comes from materiality, but there's also the power of story, and that's power is so much greater. And if we can find ways to tell stories, then that's that opens up space to breathe again, and it allows us to at least carve out little bubbles of reality that are easier to live in. And if like, even one person in the audience hears this talk and like recognizes that they have tools to make their reality a little more tolerable in the face of oppression, then I feel good.
I'm so happy to hear that, and I can tell you, you've already had that impact on me, genuine. And I included you in my PhD application because I was so inspired. And
Thank you.
I really want to thank you for sharing so much of yourself. My friend, Dr. J, has an expression that we've talked about a lot. We do a podcast and we're constantly talking about this idea about visibility. And they say that if we are not visible, we cannot insist that the world make space for us. And I always find that true but difficult. So I want to thank you very much, especially for making yourself so visible today, knowing how much that means to others and what it can cost, but also what power it definitely has, because I've seen it work and I've seen yours work. So thank you so much.
Thank you
for
so
sharing.
much. That means a lot to me. I have a whole sort of shtick on visibility that I've been working on. I've got an essay in progress on this because there is this very strange paradox of visibility, especially for trans people, because before we transition, before we come out, we're invisible. And because being really visibly gender non-conforming comes with so many social costs and so many costs to our health and our safety, there's a strong pressure in the world to stop looking trans at a certain point, right? To pass or to go stealth. That there's this sense that the only time we're visible is at the time when we're observably deviating from gendered norms and gendered expectations and beauty standards. And as a result, visibility has a price to it. And most of us are too vulnerable to bear that cost. And so there's a strong pressure to disappear back into cis passing presentation, to sort of allow yourself to sort of comfortably return to a place of not being seen as trans, essentially. And as long as like we live in a world that is sort of deeply saturated with transphobia, that's going to be true. And so I feel like there's a responsibility for those of us who do have the privileges of safety and security to maintain our visibility, even if we don't need to, even if we could disappear back into cis society. Because as long as the only visible members of our community are the most vulnerable people, the people who are most visibly deviating from the sort of norms that we police around gender presentation, it's going to preserve this hierarchy, preserve this status quo that insists that the only way to be safe in the world is to look cis.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. There's more questions. I don't
I'm
know.
reading the comments here.
I know. Well, you know what?
Here.
I'm reading a theme here. Basically, the last two questions are basically asking how we can do this and more, involving scaling this up, and somebody wants to have a festival, which I highly agree with.
Well, let me plug something then, which is that I've teased that I'm leaving academia, but the plan is to buy a farmhouse and a lot of acreage in Vermont and establish a space for workshops and gatherings and festivals. And I want to create a space to bring in LARPers and participants and workshops and artists. I'm going to do an artist residency program. We're establishing a nonprofit foundation because we have friends that we want to bring over who we want to sponsor visas for. And like the goal, I mean, like this is like the cliche of the lesbian commune in Vermont, but like the goal is to actually create a space for community building, for successful deviancy, essentially, for people who are trying to resist these oppressive normative orders that ultimately harm more of us than they help.
Well, that is an amazing thing to leave on. And if there's any way I could support that personally or collectively, I am
Once we have a
so
space, come and run an event with us.
Oh my God, yes,
It's gonna
please.
take us a little bit to get it up and running, but that's the plan.
Consider that invitation definitely asked for and hinted at and very gratefully received. So thank you so much. I would love to. Sounds amazing, and I would love to hear how it goes. You're getting a lot of love in the chat. We are coming up to the end. I know we could carry on forever. I have still a list of things I want to ask you, and I hope very much that we can have that conversation sometime in the future. Sarah, I don't know if there's anything else I should add regarding Transformative Play Initiative events going forward, but
not for now, but there will be an announcement soon.
Okay, then I won't say a thing. Then I will just say again, thank you so much, Tess, for this wonderful talk. I'm so grateful too that it's being recorded and it'll be shared. And in the meantime, I wish everybody who joined us a very good evening. And thank you all for your really interesting questions and wonderful comments. And thank you for coming.
Thank you all so much. This has been a blast.